Okay, so welcome to session 2 of the NFUO's Cultivating Best Human Resource Practices. This one is on HR fundamentals, so you're in for a treat tonight. I want to first thank our sponsors. This Employment Ontario project is funded in part by the Government of Canada and the Government of Ontario. And we are very excited by this session tonight. I'm going to have Lara introduce our guest speakers and expert panelists in a moment, but there's a few things I want to quickly clear off the table first. One is that this session covers a lot of legal matters, and none of our experts, as smart and as intelligent as they are lawyers. So, in no way should you take any of the things we're talking about today as legal advice. If there are questions you pose, and we encourage you to do so, that our expert panelists can't answer, we will take them down and we will endeavor to find someone who can give us the correct advice, legal or otherwise, to provide to you at a later date. And as for question period goes, we're going to operate just like we did last week. So if you have some burning questions over the course of the session and the presentations, feel free to put them in the chat. If we can find the right moment or pause and it seems pertinent to the conversation at hand, we will interject and have our experts answer that question. If not, we will make sure we return to those questions during the question period at the end of the session. Last but not least, about half of you or more now have completed, as you saw in your email invite, a short survey form that we're required to have completed in order to meet our ministry and funding requirements. To help support us getting the number we need, we're asking that everyone fill out this form. And when you do so, you will get a huge list of really, really helpful resources to accompany each of these sessions. And if you've signed up for one or all of the sessions, and once you fill out that form, I will send you all of those resources. If you filled out the form in the last 4 hours, you have not received the resources yet. If you did fill out the form and you somehow didn't get the resources yet, please indicate so in the chat or send me an email and I'll throw my email address in the chat for you so that you can get in touch with me. I think I sent it out to everyone, but my apologies if I missed anyone. Okay. I think that's all for me in terms of housekeeping before we begin. So I'm going to pass it over to Lara to introduce our panelists for this evening. Take it
Thanks,
away, Lara.
Steve. I'm really excited to introduce our three lovely panelists for tonight's session. Joining us is Fariha Nafees from Pfenning's Farm. Fariha is a highly motivated and results-oriented HR generalist with over 4 years of experience fostering positive and inclusive work environments. Born and raised in Saudi Arabia as a foreign national, she deeply understands international employees' unique needs and perspectives. This firsthand experience has instilled in her a strong commitment for advocating the rights and well-being of foreign workers and ensuring that they're treated fairly and equitably. Fariha has successfully implemented HR initiatives throughout her career, improved employee engagement, and maintained a positive work environment. The unique experience of working on Pfenning's Farm has provided valuable insight into Canada's foreign worker labor policies and enabled her to realize the need for significant reform. Fariha holds a Bachelor of Science in Psychology from Wilfrid Laurier University and is a certified CHRP with a specialized certification in Human Resources Management from Conestoga College. Also joining us is Dave Kranenburg, a farmer, entrepreneur, and food systems tinkerer. He is one half of Kendall Hills Farm, a small family farm on a mission to demonstrate the viability of small farms that work with nature by growing mushrooms and poultry on 70 acres of rolling forest in the ecologically sensitive Oak Ridges Moraine. In 2020, he founded the Green Circle Food Hub, publicly known as Graze and Gather, as a distribution and sales channel for food from over 100 small producers to reach thousands of customers across the GTA. In 2016, he founded the Rhizome Institute for the Future of Food to support pre-revenue and pre-governance ideas and facilitate social innovation labs such as Food Waste Lab and the United Ways Scale Lab. Previously, he served as the executive director of Meal Exchange, a national food security charity, and as the director of programming for the Center for Social Innovation, a nonprofit that provides co-working and programs for social purpose enterprises. Dave was part of the inaugural Getting to Maybe Social Innovation Residency at the Banff Center and has received the Queen's Diamond Jubilee Award for his work on food security in Canada. And last but not least, we have Sarah Dolmore, the farm manager at Mount Wolfe Farm in Caledon. Sarah manages a small team of 2 to 3 full-time seasonal staff and a mosaic of other labor in forms of woofers, volunteers from the community, and work share members of their CSA program. So like Dave mentioned, none of these folks are lawyers, but we're grateful to have them nonetheless, and that they're here to share their knowledge and experiences of navigating the nitty-gritty corners of dreaded HR requirements. So with that, I'll hand it over to Fariha to get us started.
Thank you so much, Dave. Thank you so much, Laura. I would first of all like to start off by thanking you for allowing me and giving me the opportunity to be a panelist. It's an extreme honor to be amongst you because I've just recently joined the Pfenning's family. I just completed my 1 year there. So I would love to answer any questions regarding HR, but as has been emphasized already, we are not as lawyers at this present time, and whatever information that we are presenting is basically to help you follow the HR legislations that are that should be followed at any workplace. So let's get right into it. Let's get started. So in this session, what we'll focus on are provincially regulated employers in Ontario that must adhere to the Ontario Employment Standards Act, Workplace Safety and Insurance Act, and Occupational Health and Safety Act. So there are exceptions to this rule. If your agriculture business is working with grain elevators, seed mills, or feed warehouses, or anything to do with grain, seed, or cleaning plants, those businesses are federally regulated, and they come under the Canada Labour Code, and they would not come under the ESA. So that would be a little bit different from the ESA. So even though this session is mostly focused on the ESA, there will be times that it will differ from the Canada Labour Code. And as already emphasized, we are not offering any legal advice. Please seek legal advice only for an employment lawyer. And so what I would like to discuss is, on a per capita basis, the Ontario agriculture sector has a higher injury and illness rate than any other industry in the province. As such, we should know what the proper rules are and how rules should be followed in the workplace regarding health and safety, and especially the ESA. So what I would like to emphasize is that the illness rate and the rate of injury can be reduced by increasing communication between staff and employers, education and training, and especially encouraging communication between management and employees. And if we cultivate a culture of safety and thoughtfulness and definitely have a clear and effective safety plan, That's very important. Employers have the responsibility of ensuring safe, ethical, and healthy work environments. This is very grave that we follow the standards. Thank you very much. Moving on to our next slide.
Unmute myself there. Alrighty, so yeah, the Ontario Employment Standards Act. I'm going to speak to the categories of employees that fall under this legislation. And that's, your farm workers, anyone you can probably think of who would be a part of your farm team. On our smaller operations, those roles are, more diverse than perhaps in the larger operations where you might have somebody who's only harvesting or only dealing with livestock. So pretty much any category of worker on a farm falls under this legislation. And interestingly, it's the adjacent professions as well. So the landscape gardeners was something that I was a little surprised to see, but it's like, oh, you're outside working with plants either on a farm or in landscaping and on golf courses as well. And then also so equestrian industries fall under this legislation, as does sod farming, flowers, tree growing. So it sounds like nursery employees as well, which is a very large industry in Southern Ontario, and mushroom growing, our fungal friends. I think that's the next slide. Yeah.
So getting right into it. Thank you, Sarah, for that differentiation. Now we get into the nitty-gritty of HR fundamentals. So if we're on the right slide, right? The safe farm worker rights, or so yes. So first and foremost, what are worker rights, right? So as an employer, you are supposed to give any employee that you're laying off, or terminating, a notice of termination. So what is notice of termination? So every employee deserves to know that when they're going to be terminated. And if an employee has worked for your farm for at least 3 months or more, then they must be given an advance written notice. Or in lieu of that, they can be given termination pay, or they can be given termination pay and a notice of termination. So it can be a combination of the two. So it depends on you. So termination pay can replace the notice. I hope it's not confusing for you. And then if you would like to know about what's the difference between termination pay and severance pay. So severance pay is recognition for long-term commitment. And termination pay would be for covering the notice of period when an employee is let go without warning. But severance pay compensates for loyalty and years of service. So it's up to you to differentiate between those two and the value, whatever you assign to it. And what other rights fall into worker rights? Regular payment of wages, which we know is necessary. So it can be daily, weekly, bi-weekly, semi-monthly, or monthly. And they should be given a pay stub, which breaks down everything for them, all their deductions and everything for them, like if there's stat pay or if there's overtime pay. And it must be regular. Then keeping of the employment records. This is a very big requirement and very, very important because the Ministry of Labor and basically, if you get audited, then you will be required to possess these records. So the basic rule of thumb is that after an employee finishes their employment, up to 3 years, all their documents should be kept. And vacation time and pay records must be kept for at least 5 years. There should be no reprisal prohibition, meaning the employer obviously cannot threaten or intimidate an employee for any reason. they are entitled to pregnancy and paternal leave, granted that they have been employed for 13 weeks prior to that. And then there's a number of unpaid leaves that they're entitled to. And then workers are also required to be paid with pay equity. So what is pay equity? Everybody should be familiar with this. Equal pay regardless of gender, race, ethnicity, or status. And then if you have any questions regarding this, then we can have a lot of conversation on that. However, I will give you some guidance as to where you can find this information online. On the Ministry of Labor website, you can find it at Your Guide to the Employment Standards Act. And we will be sharing all of this information with you after the presentation. And it will give you, the Ministry of Labor website will give you resources on how to approach all of these things without having to navigate through the act itself, because the act is actually quite lengthy and you wouldn't want to tackle it on your own. So the guide will be very useful to you. And we encourage you to do research, to do your own research regarding this. We can move to the next slide.
Is this me, Laura?
Hi, sorry. Is it you, Sarah?
I have my next slide is slide 9.
Slide 9? Okay. So yes, so this is me, right? This is to me, yes. So unpaid leave for farm workers. So these are the various kinds of thank you. So these are the various leaves that you can offer to your employees. 3 days of sick leave due to any illness, 3 days of family responsibility leave, 2 days of bereavement leave, and other longer term unpaid leaves can be taken. At our farm, we offer 3 unpaid days off for family responsibility leave. We offer 3 paid days off for bereavement leave for if there is a death in the family or of an immediate family member. So that's all for unpaid leaves for now. And I think we'll be moving on now to the exemptions part. Thank you, Dave.
Thank you, Fariha. So for my personal experience, I look at everything that was just covered as the bare minimum that's required as from us as employers. Because as you're about to see, there are a lot of things that I was shocked. Like I'm entering my 10th year farming that I was shocked to find out in my first year. I think I didn't hire somebody till maybe my 3rd or 4th year. It was just me and my partner trying to get this farm revived. And I was shocked to find that farm workers were just exempted from so many basic labor rights. And I'll get into all of those. But, the big things are basic labor rights denied. We'll get into the details of that. The right to collective bargaining and to form a union, not part of that. So it was, my experience in that of other farmers is that, if you want to find good people, you have to go above and beyond the bare minimum. Otherwise, there is the risk of exploitative labor practices. Right. So the quotes that there, in case you can't read them, is I've never felt exploited by my employers, but I do feel exploited by the system. That's coming from a farm worker. And the quote there from Jen Pfenning, or farm operator, is the ESA exemptions for farm workers are pathetic. I try to offer as much as I can to them gradually over time, but it's a struggle to make it match. Rules for workers and migrant laborers shouldn't differ. Some farmers will be reluctant to face changes, but let's get some good baseline rules in place rather than waiving everything that the ESA standards are for. So if you're new to all of this or you're re-examining labor practices, what I learned on my farm is like, how do you go above and beyond um, what's what's expected? So next slide we'll get into like if you're not familiar with um, what rights do exist for farms and harvesters and near farmers. Next slide, please. Okay. So as you can see, under the ESA, farm workers, there is no such thing as minimum wage, hours of work, daily rest periods, time off between shifts, weekly rest, eating periods, no public holidays, or no vacations with pay. It's like you're basically working. Like, and in some ways, I can appreciate why, because when it's time to go on a farm, it's time to go, right? Like, there's work to get done, there's a harvest to get done, right? Um, and so yeah, there is that expectation. It's like these things can't wait. If it's Labor Day and there's stuff that needs to be harvested or processed, it's happening regardless of what's happening out there in the world, right? I learned from one of my neighbors, that it's another day that ends in Y. That's the life of a farmer, right? For harvesters, fairly similar. The asterisks that are there is that it's in some cases, right? And you'll have to check. And for near farming, as a mushroom farmer, I don't consider mushrooms as near farming. I consider them farming. So, side note, I'm a little bit offended that it's near farming, but I get it. There is minimum wage requirements and there are vacations with pay, but the rest also exempted from. And the point I want to stress is that, yeah, that's the bare minimum. That's how low the bar is set for you to be competitive, to find good workers and to keep good workers, is that, offering above minimum, like capping hours of work, being flexible and saying, yeah, there's going to be times when we put in extra hours, but you're going to get that back on like with other flexibility. That's how I've structured things on my farm, is trying to figure out how you give and take the demands of the business with just respect for the people that are working for you and not exploiting them. And I see some head shaking like, yeah, that's the way to do it, but it's not necessarily the norm out there in the agricultural community, and I think it's really up to us to figure out how you do make that the norm. If any of my other colleagues here want to jump in with anything or add anything.
Just a quick anecdote that on our farm, I actually like, as somebody who started off working as a field hand before I became a farm manager, um, basically my staff only work 4 days a week. It's like they're in it for a marathon, not the sprint. That I want them to be in good shape for like the whole season. And sometimes that does mean that things might not happen like as fast as they might, but it's rarely the end of the world, and they're more than eager to rise to the occasion if there is a crisis to like fill that gap. But the kind of expectation is of a more humane work week, which I think is just better for overall like employee well-being. And oh my God, the dividends are like, to us as the employer, are very tangible in terms of retention. And if anybody knows the rigmarole of onboarding new staff and training them in a very complex and specific operation such as your farm, like finding ways to retain good employees is going to like come back to you in so many ways, value wise. So it's my anecdote. This is shocking, but I guess it covers the fact that a lot of farmers live on their farms. And so it's that's what it's covering, I suppose.
Yeah, Sarah, actually, I think you've got the next one.
All right.
Yeah.
Right. Health and safety. So the I think OSA is how you pronounce that acronym, the Occupational Health and Safety Act, and the WSIB, everyone's favorite workplace safety and insurance board. So the OSA governs all Ontario workplaces, the umbrella legislation. And within that, as employees, we are responsible for training our employees, as employers, we are responsible for training our employees and creating like a framework and parameters on the workplace for safety. And it's reciprocal. The employee also has a responsibility to accept the training and implement those operations and work within the framework that you as the employer have created. And this is where like being on the ground with your employees for a certain amount of the farm operations can be very helpful, so that you can be creating a framework that's workable to the conditions that are out there on the ground. So having some connection to the work your staff are doing still keeps you like in the real world of it, you know. And then also the staff have agency coming to you and being like, I know the framework says we should do it this way, but in reality it's more like this. That's like an option for me as like a small team, that I kind of enjoy and think is very valuable. The important thing to note here is that when you hire a new employee, you have 10 days to register them with the WSIB program. Yeah, build a health and safety plan for your business. Oh, and online awareness training. That sounds handy too. And it's a great, even if you have returning employees, just having this kind of happen at the beginning of every season to refresh our memories, and get on the same page. It's a good idea. Next slide. Okay, yeah. The employee rights under the Ontario Health and Safety Association, and the workplace hazardous materials in WMIS. So if you are a larger farm and you're working with pesticides and herbicides, and even on a small scale farm, maybe you have some sanitizing solutions that you're using, etc., or fuel, you know, that's where it's extra important to make sure your employees know their rights, and that they have the right to refuse to do a task that they feel is unsafe, or that they're undertrained or untrained for. The right to know what they're handling and what they're being asked to do. And I was actually unsure about this, guys. What's the right to participate? Just the right to participate in like creating the safety plan for the farm? Is that it, Farah? Okay, cool. And that, you know, it's a two-way street. The workers are responsible to be compliant with the guidelines as much as the employer is responsible for informing them and implementing a plan. So, I mean, nobody wants to be unsafe, but it's often the first thing that kind of gets cut, corners get cut on. So I'd say that as a farm manager, as an employer, you really bear the responsibility of creating a workplace culture where safety is like the priority, and that it's kind of a do what I say, not what I do situation sometimes, where maybe I might be hopping on and off the tractor, but I would not want to see my staff do that. You know what I mean? So it's like having safety starts at home, and role model that for your team is what I would kind of advise. Do you guys have any other input to the health and safety slide, or to this one? Oh, Dave, you're muted if you want to say something.
Yeah, not yet. I think I'll cover some pieces in the slides coming up.
Cool. All righty. That's it for me on slide number 10.
Thank you, Sarah. Very well put. Yes, safety starts at home, and modeling that is definitely key, because definitely that is key. So I will continue with that. And what are the responsibilities further? We will discuss further for the employers. What are their responsibilities? So the as employers, we must provide information, instruction, and supervision to the workers, advise workers and supervisors about hazards that might be at the workplace. We must notify the Ministry of Labor of workplace fatalities and critical injuries. We should cooperate, with the Workplace Joint Health and Safety Committee or the Worker Health and Safety representatives. And we should ensure that we take every precaution reasonable in the circumstances to protect workers. And one thing that we do, which I have observed and I've learned at our farm, is that we do refresher training every year for current and new or returning employees. And that includes health and safety and details about personal hygiene and food safety basically GAP and food safety, to ensure the quality of the product and that personal hygiene does not in any way affect the food safety or the quality of the food. Then there's the emergency plans that we're going to get into in the following slides. There's also forklift and walkie training that's provided at our workplace, sorry. And that basically includes providing awareness and education and training to workers and ensuring that a culture of safety and thoughtfulness is prominent, is there. Thank you. Next slide would be for Sarah or Dave. I think it's Dave.
Thank you, Fariha. Yeah, so WSIB, Workplace Safety Insurance Board, there are a lot of requirements that that are just expected of you, regardless of your size. Some only apply if you are a larger employee with over 6 employees. And so WSIB, the must-haves, right? In a conspicuous location, mine, like I'm sitting in my office, you know, the dog kennel. My WSIB poster is just outside the door here because it's the main building that everybody goes by, as well as the Green Book. The Green Book, I just got a notice saying that there's a new one for 2025. So I'm looking into it going like, oh, I need to purchase the new one for 20 bucks or 25 bucks or whatever it is. You need a health and safety policy statement. You need a workplace violence and harassment policy. There is a joint health and safety committee, but this is only if you have 6 or more workers. And we're going to get a bit more into that next. I personally don't have experience with that because every organization I've ever run has less than 6 for now. That might change, hopefully. There is employers have to ensure that at least one worker, and that could be the farm owner, operator, has a valid first aid certificate and is on site given during operations. I'll admit this is a very tricky one given the nature of being at a farmer's market and having to go there and leaving, who has that? I'm actually fortunate enough right now that my farm worker who's returning for a 3rd season is going through college right now to become emergency medical services. So she is well trained on this, but before her, meeting this requirement was a struggle because of the times I was off farm. And first aid kits are important to have. They need to be inspected every 3 months. The size of your first aid kit also scales with your business. There's some guidelines on that are worth checking out. The costs associated with first aid is the responsibility of the employer. I can't instruct a worker to go out and get first aid training and that they're paying for it out of pocket. This is my responsibility as an employer that somebody is there and has it. And there are a lot more resources in all of this. The other key thing is 10 calendar days to register with WSIB from the day you hire your first employee. If you're somebody like me that sometimes likes to play fast and loose with rules and get guidelines and deadlines, don't miss your WSIB ones. They ding you for it. There are penalties for missing reporting deadlines and things like that. Just stay on top of this. It's actually really, really simple to stay on top of these things, once you've got them in place. And so I think unless my colleagues have anything to add at the moment.
We actually have a question here that I was wondering maybe Fariha, you would have some personal experience with this. We had someone ask, how do you manage health and safety training with workers with different primary languages? Do you have translation or someone run those sessions in an entirely different language? Does anyone have experience with that they can share?
Yes, Sarah, that's a very good question. Thank you for asking that. Definitely, we have that at the farm. We have a lot of workers that have a different mother tongue, and with that, what we ensure is that we have a different session for them completely, that we make sure that they understand what is the training, the kind of training that we're trying to impart. And so at our farm, we are blessed to have the best support in terms of the best team leads. So we entrust the team lead with so the team lead in our situation, the team lead is there to translate as somebody is directing the slides or reiterating the slides, is going over the presentation. So if there are any questions or if there's anything that needs to be taught in a different language, the person is already there that speaks their language. So we ensure that the message is understood, that people know how to take care of themselves and how to be safe at the workplace. So if that answers your question, thank you.
And I'm just answering a quick question in the chat. It's correct. If you have less than 6 employees, you don't need a worker representative and a joint health and safety committee. Okay. So I have not had to deal with that yet. The most people I've had help out on the farm at one time is like 3, kind of sometime between full-time, part-time. We have not gotten into that. It's more on you as the owner operator of the farm to work through your own health and safety plan and try to assess the risks that your workers are going to be facing. I'll admit, step 1, I have not performed a self-assessment by completing the worksheet in the folder because I didn't know about this resource when I was getting going on all of this. But it was something that we realized, my partner and I realized early on in reviving this farm, is that, like, I don't come from a farming background, but I'm somebody that has a lot of respect for the environment, for livestock, and for machinery. And I developed, and I had some guidance on all 3 of those things. But as what I would call common sense now, and what a lot of maybe my neighboring farm kids grew up with farm common sense, as we started employing folks from different backgrounds, common sense is not common. And so relying on people to just kind of know what is hazardous and what's not is not realistic and not protecting yourself and your people. And so starting to identify those things, everything from how to operate the tractor properly, especially, like, my farm name is Kendall Hills for a reason. And so appreciating inclines becomes a thing. Livestock and gates and electric fences and weed whackers and um, yeah, hazardous materials and a whole host of things that you would think, like, oh, I would never do this. That just doesn't make sense. I've learned from hiring people of varying skills that what I take for granted is not. So one of the things my partner and I ended up doing was kind of going through and identifying those things and figuring out, one, if we could reduce the risk, right? So that's the third piece, is the plan. Like, are there ways that we can make this so that it's less likely that these things will happen? The other thing was coming up with guides and going through safety checklists with people when we bring them on. And some of the people look at us like, I'm not an idiot. Like, why are you going through this with me? Other people go, oh, this is news, right? And for the people that are looking at me being like, well, I'm not an idiot, I know these things, it's like, it's worth it. And I've also learned that going through these guides that we created, and one of them is how to operate a tractor on an incline, believe it or not, like, because of our hills, like, not cutting across things is really key. Like, even people that come in with experience and say that they know how to operate something, we go through it again because I don't know who trained them, where they learn things. what method they're using. So I go through those things again, and I don't let people use equipment unless I've gone through stuff. I don't want to see somebody that's just come on the farm like going, "Oh, I've used a chainsaw before," and then going out in Crocs, right? Like, no, no Crocs while operating. I know I see Sarah going like this, and it's like, because that happens, like weed whackers with Crocs on. I'm like, what are you doing, person? Um, and following through. And a lot of, for me being a small operator, a lot of the follow through is about being present and seeing things and taking corrective action. And it's not that somebody's in trouble, it's just, coaching them along. Uh, yeah, our health and safety policy, it's posted. It's more of a, like, I don't know, it's posted. It's one of those things that's posted, but it's more important that it's like, I think it becomes more a visual cue that you take it seriously. It's not like I've ever seen anybody like, "Oh, I'm looking through this," uh, except for when we first go through some things with them when we're doing some first onboarding. Um, but it's that ongoing commitment. And the other piece that I'll say that I always emphasize with anybody is that they ever don't feel safe in a situation, that they are it's completely okay to say so and to acknowledge it. And it's not an indication that they're an idiot, that they're incapable, incompetent, anything like that. It's that if you're not comfortable doing something, say so, because that's much better than the alternative. Um, the other one little piece I'll say in all of this is I'm wearing them right now, my earbuds. I also make it clear that, like, there's no earbuds when you're working on the farm. Like, you cannot be tuned out to the world because you can't hear livestock that are in distress, you can't hear machinery, and you can't hear people calling for help. And that's something again, a common sense thing that I didn't think I'd have to stress, but that I've really become important about being present on the farm and using your five senses. So building your health and safety plan is unique to your farm, but I hope the message that I convey the most is don't take for granted what you consider common sense. Like, if you bring on a hire and they've demonstrated that skill, great. They will look at you like, "Whoa, who have you brought on before that you've had to go through this with?" But trust me, it's like people have varying levels of experience, and it's worth, like, in this scenario, playing like building your health and safety plan for the worst case scenario. And somebody, think of it as like you're training your 6-year-old kid on how to do these things. What would be the level of instruction and guidance and protection you'd want for that? Do my colleagues have anything to add? If not, I believe it's over to
I was gonna
Sarah.
say,
Oh, sorry, Fariha. Yeah.
no, Dave, you're absolutely 100% right that one issue that we have a lot is with the earbuds. Oh my God. That's something that's very hard to deal with, especially dealing with safety. It's such a big hazard. And most of our employees are youth. So it's very difficult for the policy to actually sink in, it's an ongoing thing, exactly as you said. It's an ongoing effort. It's hard to get that across, the message across. Thank you.
Definitely. Sarah, over to you.
Oh, sorry. I was just thinking, about whether, like, if if it's a reciprocal relationship with your employee and they refuse to hold up that end by not wearing the earbuds, for example, what kind of instrument of enforcement do we have that isn't violating their rights? It's like, can you confiscate their property if they're really not going to listen? It's like a risk to their safety. Sorry, that's just where my mind is going. We don't have to talk about that, but it's just kind of like the rules are great, but then you meet the real world. And I just wonder sometimes how to proceed. Do you have any experience with that, Faria? That because I, have volunteers that are younger on the farm, and generally we don't allow earbuds, but I'd love to know how to handle that situation should it arise.
So basically, that's a very, very good concern and very good question. It can be tackled with a progressive discipline program. So in that, first the employee is verbally warned, and then they get a written statement, a written warning, and then it's basically a timeout. There might be a suspension if it continues in the workplace. So depending on your level of comfort with the progressive discipline approach, there's different time periods for each. So you can wait after the verbal warning, you can give them a couple of months or weeks before a written warning, and the written warning goes on their employment record. So it's quite serious as you go up the program. So there's definitely we go with that approach.
That's
So
good. Thank you. Hopefully it doesn't come to punitive measures if it can be solved. It's just a conversation, but it's great to know that there's a roadmap out there. Cool. So yeah, the worksheet for hazard risk assessment. This is a nice little kind of troubleshoot document where you can identify the hazards that might be on your specific farm, who and how they affect, and what the priorities are around the likelihood of injury being caused, or can it, in fact, cause injury? It's like a stirrup hoe. Is injury likely, or can it cause injury? And then what controls exist around it. So this is a resource that will be available, I'm assuming, and that you can tailor and personalize it to your operation. Not everybody has a potato washing line. Do my colleagues have anything to add to that? No. Here's another form, kind of blank template, health and safety action plan to involve your employees on. So this is part of that kind of culture of safety. Giving them agency often really helps. So you don't have to kind of be the person upholding the rules because you created them. Like really engage your staff and deputize somebody who seems like they're responsible. That would be my advice. And oftentimes people who want like upward mobility in the organization are more than happy to take on responsibility around this because it shows they have initiative and they get kind of more insight into the operational considerations of your business. And yeah, these are great resources.
thank you, Sarah. So moving on to health and safety reps and joint health and safety committee. So when do you need that at your farm? When do you need a health and safety rep or a joint health and safety committee, which is like more than one person? So the so the general requirement is that you're not required to have either a JHSC, which is the committee, or a health and safety representative if you're just 1 to 5 employees. If you have 1 to 5 workers. If you have less than 20 workers, then you don't need a JHSC. You just need a health and safety representative who is selected by the workers themselves. All right. And next, what is the Joint Health and Safety Committee? So it's made up of worker and employer reps. Together, they're mutually committed to improving health and safety in the workplace, right? And then when is a joint health and safety committee required at your workplace? So in the case that you have 20 or more regularly employed workers, you will need a JHSC. If it's below 50 workers, you will need a committee with two members. One member represents the workers and one represents management. But if you have above 50 workers, then you would need 4 members for the GHSC. And 2 members will be from the workers and 2 from the management. Other than that, I would like to emphasize that The JHSC is required to meet every 3 months within agriculture, but it should be based on your risk level at your farm. So it's based on the level of risk. So if there's more risk for injury or any hazards at your farm, then you can meet more than 3 months. Like you can meet every month, for example, which we do. We meet every month in summer, and then in winter it's every 3 months. So once you are required to have a committee, basically you have more than 20 regularly employed workers, there are certification requirements. So you will need to have at least a one employee member or one management member JHSC certified. And this certification it lasts forever. So once you have the JHSC certification, it's never going to expire, but you are required to keep the certification to maintain it. You are required to have refresher training every year. And for the health and safety representative, I'm sorry, I missed a point, that you can have multiple people filling in the role and the same rep role throughout the season and can count that as one person. So that's, I think that's all for this slide. And then moving on to, yes. So make sure that you have a paper trail for everything that is covered in this session in case an audit or an inspection takes place. So if any health and safety violations are found, then the business can be issued an order of compliance. So it's very, very important to keep your paperwork in order. Routine inspections can happen at any time with or without notice. If you are given, oh, I already went over that. You might be compliant, but if your paperwork is not in order, it doesn't help. And it's better to be prepared ahead of time. So an example would be how we have a health and safety session, and we keep records of that. We keep an agenda, a record of the agenda and the attendance. And if in order to ensure compliance, employers can make sure that they have a comprehensive health and safety program in place. Ensure the use of proper protective equipment and conduct place hazard assessments if required. Dave, I think you're up next with farm equipment.
Yes, I am. Yes. The main thing I'm going to try to stress again here is common sense, don't assume it, and that you want to ensure that that your farm workers are trained on different equipment, but then also, and this is the thing that we learned, is that that there might be additional materials you can provide. Like when we created our how to operate the tractor guide, we actually have it hanging next to where the tractor is, right? Because the other thing I've learned is that very few people want to admit after you've gone through it several times with them or even once that they don't know something. So providing that kind of little easy refresher thing right there so somebody could quickly look and be like, oh yeah, there's this piece that I forgot to do or don't do this. It is helpful. And we've done that with some of the more obvious equipment. Our farm doesn't have a lot of machinery. Like but what we do have, I go through with them quite a bit, and it's real. Like I've taken it my responsibility, that they don't get hurt using equipment, because I actually think that's probably one of the easier things to prevent people from getting hurt by is that proper training on these things. There's a lot of places where things can go wrong on a farm, but if you can get people feeling comfortable around the machinery and smart around it, like one of the big ones for me was around our tractor has the PTO and making sure people weren't Like it wasn't until my worker was in her second year with us that I even showed her how to like attach and use it and trusted her with it because I want to see a level of confidence with machinery before they go to the advanced stuff. And PTOs can be vicious if not treated with the respect, right? Um, and again, not assuming that uh, not assuming that somebody's familiar with it, even if they say they are. There's a lot of reasons why people will say, if you ask them, like they don't fully understand the equipment, they think they've operated something similar, they don't want to appear incompetent when you've just hired them on, anything like that. So don't assume, go through it with them. Even if they're nodding their head, yeah, I've used this equipment before. Go through it, go through it, go through it is my takeaway on that. Um, because I think like yeah, the severe injuries are going to come from equipment. I've been lucky so far that we haven't had those, right? And that's why I think like if you can overemphasize equipment and machinery safety, your risk of having to deal with anything serious is going to go like low down. You're going to get down to slips and falls and cuts and abrasions from just normal course of activity, hopefully. Yeah. Anything to add, Sarah, Fariha, before Fariha takes over the next one?
Great, thank you. I'm sorry, I skipped the emergency plan and the evacuation plan details on the previous slide. Would you like me to go over that, or you're okay with so what are you keeping a record of? You have to keep a record of so monthly workplace inspection results. A very important aspect. I'm so sorry for skipping these points. So a designated worker member of the committee inspects the workplace at least once a month for the health and safety. So these inspection results are very important for the Ministry of Labor and the OSHA. And every time you have a meeting, so it's either monthly or every 3 months for the GHSC, these minutes are official records. They have to be kept just like the employment records. And they can be requested at any time by the Ministry of Labor. So it's very important to have those. Next, you must have a floor plan indicating fire extinguisher equipment and these kind of things like extinguishers, eye wash stations, exits, and there should be a plan for emergency procedures in the case of a fire or any kind of natural calamity like an earthquake or anything else, God forbid. So that's something that you should keep posted and should be included in the training of new hires and present staff. Thank you so much. Sorry for going back. So we can go to the WSIB. Oh no, somebody got hurt, which is my first reaction is like, no. So, and Jen is like, it's all good. And she's just like, she holds the fort. So, first things first, somebody's gotten hurt. All responsibility on you. As the employer, you have clear and specific responsibilities in case of an injury of an employee. Determine how bad it is, whether first aid treatment is required, or they need to go to a doctor or a nurse and they need to go to a medical facility. So if they just need first aid treatment and they can return to work or modified light duties for a few days or more, then no WSIB form and no report for the WSIB. However, if you see that the injuries is not controllable and you can't help the person to the degree that is required and they need to go home or they require medical assistance, then we have to report it to the WSIB. And for that, there's loss of pay as well. And for that, you use the Form 7, which is basically the, sorry, just one second, which is the employer's report. So it's called the employer's report of injury or disease. So this is the report that as an employer, you're supposed to submit for the employee. So the Form 7, so there's lots of WSIB forms. There's Form 7, Form 6, Form 8. So Form 7 is especially for the employer, for the employee. So the employer basically fills it for the employee. Oh, sorry for repeating. And the employer is responsible for the transportation or for medical care of the person. Not only do they arrange it, they pay for it as well. The employer pays for the wages for that day, for the injury. Now, in terms of reporting to the WSIB, there is a time limit. So within 3 days of the injury that has taken place, employer has to submit a report or basically inform the WSIB of the injury through the Form 7. And if this does not take place within 3 days, then there is a fine of $250. And if this does not take place for a month, if it's basically due to administrative negligence or any other reason, there's a $1,000 fine for that. So, right? So Form 7, very important. So first thing to determine is whether there's loss of time and there's medical assistance required for that. So any injury or near misses are causes for investigation. Please investigate, keep records, what happened to prevent it happening to prevent it from happening in the future. Stay in contact with the employee off work to ensure WSIB requirements are being met. Develop a return to work plan using Form 8, the WSIB Form 8. Provide a copy to the worker and WSIB. WSIB claims can remain open for a very long time and can be reopened or reinvestigated months after being closed. So these are some of the things that are important if they're important to know if a worker gets hurt. So that's it for Form 7. I think it's on to you, sir. Thanks.
Yes, it is. Thank you for that. Fariha, okay. Climate hazards, everyone's favorite new thing to be worried about. So there actually are no Ontario health and safety protocols addressing environmental hazards at this time. So what can we do as employees in terms of infrastructure and policy? Communication is really important in this because you're out in the climate. So having a buddy system that's predetermined, walkie-talkies, or making sure people have their phones on them for ease of getting in contact, and evacuation alarms. This is pertaining to an event like storms, which can come on suddenly, floods or fires, etc. Don't leave safety decisions up to your workers. So enforce protocols based on set benchmarks. I would say that having a really kind of clear, or not clear even, but maybe just like imagine what the worst thing that could happen is on your farm based on the specifics that are going to be particular to your location and your landscape. So for example, our farm is like Dave's, quite hilly because we're on the Oak Ridges Moraine. So driving a trail in dry conditions is very different than driving it in the rain. If it has had erosion, which they often do. We have trails through woodlots that I, impress on my staff not to use if it's windy. because of the risk of falling trees. Some of us have season extension infrastructure like tunnels, etc. Those can be extremely dangerous and high winds, which can come on suddenly. So just addressing what the specifics of your farm are as they interact with different climatic based scenarios. And the same thing with livestock. They can be unpredictable and dangerous, more so when during a storm. So just imagine what could go wrong and try to kind of work backwards from there before it happens. This is a tip here that while there are no binding on OSA protocols addressing poor outdoor air quality events or heat exposure for outdoor workers, employers have the responsibility to keep a safe and well-maintained workplace and to take all reasonable precautions to protect your workers from illness and injury. And integrating climate concerns is key to successful hazard planning. And there are tools out there like a Humidex calculator that can help. I have a anecdote from a few years ago when the wildfire smoke from Quebec was quite bad. And we had a group of Waldorf school children doing their like 1 week mandatory volunteering on our farm. And these are like 14-year-olds. Oh my God, the earbud thing. Nails. So like fake nails. It was wild. But the air quality was terrible. I was concerned for my staff as well for these kids. There was no guidance from the school about it or the parents. And so it was up to me to be like, well, I'm making you guys wear N95s and take frequent breaks from like working out in the sun. It was just kind of like off the cuff, kind of instinctual. We also took like a longer lunch that day. And the same thing goes for heat. Just be flexible and monitor your staff. Like if you can, be out there with them, kind of monitor or check in regularly with the staff member that you've deputized to be your eyes on the ground about how are people doing in this heat or this smoke, and morale is really important. And I would say it's not to be under considered. So yes, you might be really stressed about the effect of the inclement weather or climate on your crops. And I've experienced like my staff internalize that as well. They're really worried about it. And it's just part of the workplace culture where we say, that's very important and it's all of our hard work and those crops. And also it's like our health and safety is equally important. So during those hot summer months, I budget for keeping popsicles in the freezer, and it's like unlimited popsicles, just get them when you need them or want them. And it seems like a small thing, but it's not to be kind of understated that if your staff are aware that you have that you care about their well-being, it goes a long way. It seems strange to have to even mention that, but an effective communication saves lives. So having a plan in place for if crisis arises, which it can come on very suddenly, people shouldn't have to think, what they have to do in that situation. So this is where at the preseason team meeting and checking in when there's like forecasted inclement weather, like heat waves or wildfire smoke, at least we can kind of get ahead of that with the weather forecasting, which is good. So incorporating that into your weekly or daily team meetings is an opportunity to enforce your protocols and just make sure they're current in everyone's mind. Do you guys have anything to add to that, Fariha and Dave?
I would just jump in to say that there is one question here in the chat about good policy on clothes gear for summer farm work that I thought would be good to cover in here. I know for me, I'm fairly flexible except when it comes to footwear. I don't have a policy on clothing. It's like I'm not going to police somebody's style, except that I want to make sure that we're wearing proper footwear because you're coming and going. And then the interesting thing for me is that coming and going from some of the buildings and from like running that's part of my requirements for the artisanal chicken program and biosecurity, being able to change footwear. So most people opt for something that they can quickly slip on and off, as they come and go from different sections of the farm. but the rest is up to them, including how much skin they want to show and head protection and things like that, except that we encourage them to be smart about it. But
Yeah,
I don't know if you have
likewise.
things
I
to
give
add there,
advice
Sarah.
on
Yeah,
what kind of
yeah.
works for what has worked for me in almost 15 years of farming, which is uh light, loose fitting, like light colored, loose fitting layers, especially for the heat. So like oversized men's work shirts, dime a dozen at the thrift store. I keep a lot on hand, and often like in the Kubota that we use to get to the fields, um, to protect skin from the sun and reflect the sunlight. And then just like wide brimmed hats, like don't overestimate how much heat dark hair can absorb. And I don't know, we kind of make it fun, like the farm chic, like how eclectic our outfits can be. If you can't already tell, we're all women on our farm, but it's like around kind of safety of what it means to have a practical outfit that just makes working more an enjoyable experience comfort wise. I prefer long pants even on hot days, uh, and layers in the spring and fall. There was also kind of an incident where I had somebody harvesting some branch material and they were wearing lightweight work pants. And there was a thorn injury that I didn't actually know the severity of, neither did the staff person until like they had already gone home. So there was an opportunity to do the like assessment because it was just like, oh, got pricked by the thorn. Unbeknownst, there was like part of it still embedded. And now like this person's coming back. So that kind of event means that they are going to take precautions in terms of their work wardrobe to be wearing thick fabric pants, and possibly also I have some chainsaw chaps that when we're working with that particular crop, make sure we wear them, gloves, etc. I try to stress like everybody have their own set of gloves because otherwise it's just lost gloves all over the place. And I do supply, like have them on hand, pun unintended, but there's more agency when it's somebody's pair. So it's like I'll supply the first pair and be like, these are yours for the season, keep track of them, instead of them going into the communal glove drawer and then there's only left-handed gloves
Mm-hmm.
3 months later.
Very quickly, since we're still on attire, someone asked, I guess, two questions here. One is footwear. We've heard don't wear Crocs with whippersnippers, but do you require boots on the farm, or are you just closed toe shoes, I guess? And then do you have any advice on tick mitigation and bites?
Yeah, we have ticks here. We do
Yeah.
kind of have in our health and safety package information about ticks, and um I'll be updating that with like what to do if you find an embedded tick more than 24 hours later. So you have to kind of, I'll instruct my employees on how to submit it for testing. But basic tick prevention is on them really to tuck their pants into their socks or check themselves at the end of every day. And then on us to tell them where the more high risk areas to work. So I like out in the underbrush and the growth. And often they come in on the dog. And so like when we're inside the house on lunch, that's actually when we find the ticks. It's great.
Mm-hmm. And just on the subject of the boots, yeah, like the nature of the work on my farm is so varied, switching from poultry to mushrooms to, maintenance work and fencing and stuff. It's just you don't know what you're going to like get up to at any given minute or what might happen. And so being ready for those things and having boots on, like closed-toed shoes, is just yeah, it's I've had people wear sandals, thinking that it's a light day or something, and it's like no, like all of a sudden you're lifting something, and the risk of they don't have to be steel-toed, but it's just that you just got to be ready to get to work, right?
Yeah, I advise closed-toed boots. And honestly, most of my staff just do that anyway because they want the ankle support for being out. The other thing about
Yeah,
safety is like the long-term risks that we're not necessarily talking about. These are like immediate risks of getting hurt, but with farm work, we're working with our bodies for prolonged days, weeks, months, years, hopefully. And so building in like ergonomics and best practices for like the most important tool, maintenance of that, right? I just wanted to quickly touch base on the infrastructure engineered controls for these climate hazards. Sounds really fancy, but that's just something like making sure people know where to go for shade, or maybe you don't work in that area of the farm if it's far, far away from shade on like a super hot day. Having a cooler on hand for water if you're not close to your water source, that people can refill their personal water bottles. And in all our first aid kits, especially, well, mostly the ones out in the field, we have the rehydration solution. And in our health and safety package for our like internal use, there are like how to recognize signs of heat stroke, and what to do to kind of mitigate the symptoms if you see or experience them. Yeah.
One thing I really liked and I wanted to mention was um, that we start the day way earlier when we know that it's going to be. We basically keep an eye on the weather, and then the management, especially the upper management, they make sure that everybody's aware of a very, very hot day coming up, and then they alter their schedule. So basically, they end up starting like at 5 or 6 in the morning, and they have an early end to the shift so that the heat is not, an issue. And then the popsicles, we use those too. Those are amazing. Everybody loves those. And then watermelon, or on the ice, fresh fruit on the ice is always a very good option.
I think this is also me, the wage subsidy programs for Ontario farms. Yes, okay, and I'm still off mute. Okay, so we actually do use a wage subsidy on our farm, so I can speak to this. These are often very competitive and have different deadlines, and those deadlines shift within the program from year to year. So, for example, this year, the CSJ, or Canada Summer Jobs Subsidy, which is usually has an intake deadline of January or February, was early, like December, mid-December. So I don't know who decides or what that's about, but that could be really disruptive if you rely on these wage subsidies, which I know often a lot of us small farmers are operating on pretty thin margins, and we want to pay our staff a living wage so that we can retain them and also value their labor. It's become pretty important to us, the CSJ wage subsidy, but there are other ones. So most are project related. You might need to be creative with the application. It could be a long time to fill out and navigate some of these applications, but it's often worth it for the subsidy. And the NFU Ontario newsletter advertises some of these wage subsidy programs, so that's a good resource to check in with what's available. Do your research, make sure if it's a legitimate, i.e. government funded program and not a scam. We know that those are out there. And yeah, they do come up at different times of the year. So flag them in your calendar and then work backwards from there to make sure that you don't miss like a potentially key deadline. What else about the WSI, about the wage subsidies that interesting here?
I'll just hop in, Sarah, and let everyone know that we're actually hosting a bonus 5th session this year for the HR series, and it's going to be exclusively on grants and loans. So we'll be going over a lot of this in that session as well. And the team working on that is putting together a really awesome document for tracking all of these deadlines as well. So definitely stay tuned for that.
Thank you, Laura. That's great. I'm writing it down right now.
The
Yeah.
piece I would like to add is that all of these programs will require you to be up to date on all of your requirements underneath WSIB, CPP, EI, everything. If you do not have that solid foundation already in place, don't even they're not going to consider you. The other piece I would add is that I've got a returning farm worker now coming into her third season with us, and we first found her, and hired her under that youth employment and skills program, right, which provided a 50% wage subsidy, which was amazing because in almost every job in the world, you have to think that it takes 6 months for somebody to really learn their job. And that's a farm season, right? And so that allowed us to have a runway with somebody being like, okay, it's gonna need more supervision, more support, that longer runway. Fantastic. In my thinking though, I didn't just pocket that other 50, like the 50% subsidy. I was like, okay, how can we like hold that back and maybe use it to retain her for year two as we saw that she was working out so that we could offer a raise and be ready to assume 100% of the salary in years two and now heading into year three. So thinking of these programs as a ramp up for like employee training and retention rather than just a one-time shot in the arm is a good strategy of thinking about these things.
Thanks, Dave. That's good.
Oh, yes, this is me. This is all that fun nitty gritty stuff because I do handle payroll for both of the businesses that I run. And yeah, there's the thing I'll preface this with is I have, anytime I put out a job posting, I inevitably have somebody approach me being like, hey, would you do this under the table? Right? Because under the table in ag, it happens. My response is always no, and I've always done things above board on. And one of the reasons is being a responsible employer. The other reason is that I've found that it's actually respectful to the employee as well, because I have had employees have to go on EI and they need those records of employment in order to get any sort of benefits when they're going through tough times for personal reasons of, and then I brought those people back afterwards. Like, but without doing things by the book, you're one, you shouldn't, but it's also disrespectful, I think, to the people working for you. And so it starts with, the offer letter and getting information that you need right from day one. So the TD1 form is really helpful. That's when you get things, you're getting their SIN. Sorry, can you still hear me? Yeah, okay. You're getting their SIN, you're getting their mailing address, you're getting them to fill out if there's any exceptions or unique things when it comes to some of the deductions. Um, I myself, when it comes to calculating wages, like if they're hourly, yes, you need them reporting timesheets. If they're salaried, it's less important. But even with my salary employees, where they're getting like a weekly lump sum, we track hours so that that situation where it's like it's go time, you're going to be putting a lot of hours in the next couple of weeks. We can at least try to offset that so that it's a reasonable amount of time over the course of the season. So I have everybody track their hours, knowing that some are hourly and that's what you're getting paid. Some are salaried and you'll be you'll get loo time, or there'll be a like when the farm work and the seasonal work kind of subsides, you won't be putting in 50 hours, 60 hours. So timesheets become really important. I do use payroll software. For a long time as a small business operator and entrepreneur, I would go to the Canada website, and you can, and punch in the information and it'll do the calculations of what you need to um, deduct from the employee for CPP and EI and what your responsibilities as an employer are for CPP and EI. And then you can do all that out. You can write the check, you can do the direct, the e-transfer, however you're paying them. I found that, I use QuickBooks for my bookkeeping. I found that paying the $100 or whatever it is a month for their payroll software and having it all automated with direct deposit was just worth it. Like it's tracking in my books the CPP, the EI, the deductions. The more important thing I found is that come year end, when it comes time to then issue your T4 statements to all of your staff, it's very easy. It's a few presses of a button rather than having to roll up like a whole bunch of data that you're keeping in random spreadsheets. And that, to be honest, I often found I was doing incorrectly, and then it would come back and you're sending in your statement at the end and CRA is saying, oh, you owe money, and employees are saying, oh, why did I continue contributing to CPP when I had reached my max and you were taking deductions, so now I'm owed money. It becomes a mess. I highly recommend, like, you can do it yourself, just be really smart around how you're tracking things, you know. But in the grand scheme of things, I was like, okay, the additional cost of the payroll software for the amount of time I was spending managing it myself, I just said, I'm going to trust this stuff and do my paperwork properly. Um, so yeah, your remittance to CRA will depend on how you're set up with them. It could be monthly, it could be quarterly. Uh, Often it's based off of your total payroll amounts, but it also has to do with your history with them. Like if you were a quarterly remitter and you kept on missing your deadlines, they move you to monthly. Um, there are penalties that can come into effect if you're missing your remittances. Um, you get notified, pay attention to your notices from CRA, whether they're email or physical mail, um, and report, on your frequency. I put it in as a constant reminder for myself. Okay, it's time to do my payroll remittances and like send in the forms, send in my payments, do all of that. Issuing the T4s, the WSIB as well. That is on a quarterly basis. I believe, at least for me, it is. But again, it might be based off of your unique needs as an employer. So double check that. When you first set up WSIB, you do get your employer code, and that's going to tell you the rate at which you remit, like whether you're 1.21 or 1.96. It really depends on your industry and the risk assessment of you. So you'll get that. The other one is employer health tax if your total payroll is over $1 million. So these are all things that you are required to do as a business owner. So there's no getting around these. Keeping in mind WSIB premiums and CPP deductions can be based on age and positions held. So knowing where you fall becomes really, really important in all of this. End of year responsibilities, I touched on a little bit. But you do yourself a favor if you're collecting all of this info and being a stickler for it, like around the employee's SIN number and mailing address. I made the mistake once of not collecting that info. That employee did not work out. I had to let them go. And then when it came time to issue the end of year, like the T4 slip, I was like, I don't have it, right? And it's like, you can, despite numerous requests to get it, did not get it. And no legal consequences on that because there is an avenue. You have to be able to show that you made every attempt possible to collect this information. But I was kind of like, I should have just made sure I got it before their first paycheck, right? The other, I might have. Sorry, can you hear me? My earbuds just died. Yeah, okay, thank you. The other big one is the record of employment, and that goes back to, I feel, as a big obligation to your staff, whether they're with you part-time, full-time, they leave willingly or unwillingly, or however the end of employment. The record of employment is that official thing that you send to Service Canada so that if that situation arises where they need social support of any sort, they have that information on file, and they can get the financial support they need through EI. So record of employment, really, really important. Trying to think. The final piece I'll say on all of this is the idea of living wage. It's worth taking a look at what living wage is for your region and seeing if it's possible to get close to that with your operation. There's minimum wage, and then living wage is actually what it would cost for someone to get by, like pay their bills, and have a meaningful life, like when it comes to grocery and some disposable income. So if you can get there with your staff, you're doing something really right. And there is a certification, I believe, that you can get as well for living wage certification. I believe you can become a living wage certified employee. So it's worth, even if you are a small operator, like I employ one full-time person on my farm, sometimes some part-time seasonal people. I employ
2.5 full-time equivalents on the food hub side of things, and I strive for living wage. I keep an eye on it. And, and even that, sometimes I'm like, well, like I'd love to offer more if I could get sales up. So I don't know. I went through a lot of stuff there around EI, WSIB, CPP, like CRA remitting requirements, all of that fun stuff. It's a lot to wrap your head around at first, but once you get in the rhythm of it, it's just becomes the part of the routine of your farming operation. So I'd
You just
encourage
gave
you to
me
develop that memory. Yeah.
gave me a whole new sense of appreciation for my aunt, who is our bookkeeper. I'm going to thank her
Yeah.
heartily for doing all of this. She's so timely with it, and like it's appreciated. I had a question about the living wage thing, Dave. Does it
Mhm.
pertain to where you are located or to where your staff live? Because if they live in a different jurisdiction, are their costs of living related to that jurisdiction where they live or to where they work, which is
That's interesting. I've never actually thought of that before, to be honest. I would hazard a guess it's gonna come down to where they're living, right? Um, where I am, like I'm on the outskirts of Durham region, which is a big municipality, but and I'm on the outskirts of that. But yeah, if they are coming in from, closer to the downtown Toronto core, their living expenses will be a little bit higher than what it would be out here, on some items, right? So yeah, I'd take into consideration that maybe. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you should take into consideration. I think the way the Ontario Living Wage Network works, though, and functions is where the employer is located. Um, but yeah, I mean, clearly, if they're driving outside of the GTA, it's going to be a different wage than if they lived downtown. There's a couple of questions in the chat too that I think just quickly get to if we can here. Dave, I think you answered how many employees you have. But there was a question here around the record of employment. If I hired a returning employee to do 10 hours of work over the winter, do I need to do an ROI just for those 10 hours if they'll be starting up again in April?
I have issued an ROE every time somebody leaves, and that I believe is the requirement. Like their with me has stopped, and Service Canada wants to know why. Like, and there is a check mark on that form being like, will they be returning or like um, rehired or something like that. Um, so I do that. I've had people, like especially like in the winter, I've brought on some other nearby farmers as my delivery drivers, right? They leave when their season starts up, they come back the next season, or even they've helped me out short term when I've lost a driver because they moved on to other work. That person's come in to help out and I do the process again. Um, yeah, that's how I approach it because I believe that's what's required. But again, as we said, I'm a farmer, not a lawyer, so double check those things. That's how I approach it. Yeah.
Thanks, Dave. I think that's covering your bases by doing it that way to make sure you're legally compliant. Another quick question, folks. I shared in the chat like a link to lifting safely on farms, but someone asked that lots of small vegetable farms list needing to lift 50 pounds as a job requirement, but in their experience, few people are capable of that when they're hired. What do you do to help people build up to that kind of strength and be able to lift safely?
that's an interesting.
Yeah, it's a big question.
For me, it's hauling feed. It's not vegetables yet. And yeah, I've when staff first start, they're often not able to take an entire 50-pound feed bag easily, right? Like, um, and so yeah, the option to pour out some of it into a bucket and slowly develop. But I do want to see them like developing that. Like you should be able to, like as your muscles develop, be able to lift, a 50-pound bucket of feed so that you're making one trip out to feed the animals rather than two, right? So that's how I can handle it on the livestock feeding side of things, and even some of the like the mushroom blocks that we use and things like that, like being able to lift a crate of those, if they're 10-pound blocks, so being able to lift five of them, I want to see progress towards there. But because of how things are weighted, it's not like it's a 50-pound something that you can't remove some of that weight and let them build up that over time. But that's for me, I'm not as familiar on the produce side if it's as gentle when it comes harvest season.
We often just say, hey, this is a two-person carry,
Yeah.
like our crates or our bushel baskets of cabbages, for example. Like, this is also perhaps another do as I say, not as I do. Like, I'll lift those by myself, but I'm not expecting, they're managing expectations, expecting my
Yeah.
staff to do that as well. So, it's like, listen to your body, have a buddy, don't hurt your
Yeah.
back. And they get strong, you know. I think that the requirement of lifting 50 pounds is just perhaps more of a like point of reflection for the applicant to the job of like, is this like is the physicality of this position, which isn't going to be like every day or constant, but it's going to be occasional, and is that something that I'm prepared to do, right? And it's also
Mhm.
just convention to have that there in the application, right or wrong.
Thanks everyone for sharing. This is actually our last slide, so we kind of naturally moved into Q&A. So if anyone else has other questions, to drop in the chat, or you can unmute if you want and ask your question.